Hey, everybody. In today's episode, there's a good friend of mine, Tech. He comes on the show today to talk about his experience, strength, and hope. Tech got clean and sober at the age of 20 years old. The vast majority of his life, he grew up in Northern California. In this episode, we're talking about the feeling of emptiness he never felt a part of, and he always looked to things to escape. He's experienced self-harm. He's experienced deep bouts of depression. He's experienced marijuana and ultimately how marijuana took him to getting clean and sober. We talk about him being homeless and living out of a Buick and why waking up one morning with cockroaches all over him, he decided that he needed to make a change. And at 20 years old, he found himself at a fork in the road, and that's when he decided to change. It's an absolutely amazing story. Good friend of mine. Tears are shed. I know you're going to love this episode. Enjoy the show. Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we have got Tech. Tech, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
I love that name. First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whichever one that you choose to use, and thank you for watching on YouTube. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us. info@realrecoverytalk.com. Again, that's info@realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. What do you think about that, Tech?
I think it's pretty cool. I saw it on the wall when I walked in.
Yeah.
And I was like, slogans are really a part of recovery in so many ways. And mess to message, like, it's good. It hits. It sticks.
I actually got that from a listener. She sent an email years ago and said something about you're turning people's messes into messages or something like that. And I'm like, oh, perfect. I'm taking that.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, glad you're on, dude. I know we've been talking about this for a while, so I'm going to do a little bit of an intro, and we're just going to get right into it. All organic, nothing scripted.
Yep.
We've known each other now for about, what, a year and some change?
And a half, yeah.
Yeah. Our first interaction, so we go to the same meeting on Wednesday nights, and I knew from first interaction with you that like you have this vibe about you. You know what I mean? In terms of the like recovery sense that's like appealing to a lot of people.
Okay, thank you.
I wish everybody in recovery and that, are in a position to help other people get sober had your vibe. Reality is we're all humans. That's not the case. Humans tend to be assholes sometimes, You're not. You're cool. You came rolling in here on your motorcycle, and it's like it's appealing, right? So that was kind of the vibe that I got from you, our first interaction. And I don't normally say that about a lot of people. I hate to say it, character defect of mine. I'm rather judgmental. Something that I've constantly worked on and continue to work on. But all that to say, over the past, call it year and a half of us being able to interact and stuff, I just, I knew this made sense for you to come on the show because you have an amazing story of recovery. And, having the opportunity to hear, some of the stuff that you've gone through in your recovery, it has to be shared. And so I'm glad we were able to make this happen. And I'm looking forward to it because, I'm sure there's things that I'll learn about you. So in terms of listeners, we have family members, we have loved ones, and we have people that are in recovery. I don't know if we have active alcoholics and addicts. I doubt, but maybe. But here's the thing. Family members, loved ones, they share it with their son, their daughter, their spouse, so keep that in mind whenever, we're talking. That's basically our listeners. And we'll see where things go. So glad you're here. Let's start with this. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from originally. We're not going to do a lot of war story-ish, obviously. We want to stay focused on recovery and sobriety and stuff like that, but give us an intro.
Well, war stories have their places, but they're best around a table, sharing a pizza after a meeting, in my opinion. So I was born in North Carolina. Both my parents are from outside of the country. So first generation in the United States, not super different. They're from England. So I had an upbringing that was kind of a cross between American and European values, I would say. Raised in an alcoholic household. But at the age of 7, that pretty much stopped. My mom found program. And so I got exposed to program indirectly, relatively young. I grew up in a upper middle class family. We didn't really, I didn't ever feel like I went for need. Sometimes we didn't always get it what we wanted. But I think that was a part of good parenting, right? So I think my parents did a really excellent job with what they had, with the knowledge they had, with the tools at their disposal. I received what I deemed to be an excellent upbringing. But as I've come to learn, that's not the entire equation, right? There was a lot more that went into who I have become. And so when I discovered at 13 that we were leaving where I grew up, that we were selling our house and moving across the country to California, the world was over, right? I've always been a fairly emotional person, especially as a young kid, which is where my disease really began. And I discovered that disease in the discomfort of verbal confrontation of my parents, resulting in me running to the fridge. My parents would go to sleep. I get out of bed. I go to the fridge and I eat second dinners, right? And I learned that if I ate enough, I stopped feeling what I was feeling. And that was the beginning of my disease. I began modifying the way I felt, utilizing an external source, making life bearable because I didn't know how to bear it. So I did that for years. And then we moved to California after I had my first drink in the attic with a bud when I had my first cigarette. Right? My room had the attic access, so we were hanging out there. I'm like, I'm never going to see you again. Da, da, da. We drank this bottle that was 7 years old, right? Because my mom got sober when I was 7. It was about 13. It had been sitting outside in an outside storage. We found it when we were cleaning the house out to sell the house. It was essentially rubbing alcohol and paint thinner. I don't know, whatever you want to call it at that point. It was no longer alcohol. It was horrible gin. And I drank it, and it was awful. And I smoked my first cigarette, and I moved to California. And I was the definition of an emo boy, right?
Of a what?
Emo boy.
Oh, okay.
The world was against me. Everything was awful. Started dyeing my hair black, wore black clothes, was very unhappy, experienced some self-discovery with self-harm, right? It was another thing I found, an external source to modify the way I felt because I was overwhelmed. I was constantly overstimulated by emotions and by feelings. And I learned that if I caused harm to myself, it allowed me to compartmentalize the sensation. And so I could block everything else because the only thing you can focus on at that point is the pain. And that was something that gave me relief because it was never about the solution of changing. It was about the immediate gratification of escaping. And I needed to escape how I felt because it was always there. It was always pressure. I didn't know at the time, but it was always this pressure on my soul. My soul felt heavy. I couldn't take it anymore. And at those times of critical mass, I would cut, I would burn, whatever it was. And finally, I was free again, right? Because I hadn't really discovered drugs and alcohol yet. Not really. But
How old were you during the self-harm?
It probably started around 13. Yeah.
I never understood, and it makes sense, but it just in my head, it doesn't. I've never experienced it. I've met and treated plenty of clients that have had a history of self-harm to the tune. You can see the scars. It's very apparent. But in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like sad and bad and all the things that come with that. It's painful. I don't like pain. I got a sleeve full of tattoos. You have tattoos. I'm like, this is not enjoyable, Being in a place of actively being okay with self-harm, I can't wrap my mind around it. Right. The way you put it makes perfect sense. How did you word that again?
Essentially, it is the ability to escape your present emotions by hyper focusing, because your body is programmed to focus on pain, right? It triggers fight or flight. It enables us to be more alert, more aware. But that alertness rips me out of my head, out of my psyche. So the pain causes immediate alertness. Immediate alertness rips me out of the cycle of spinning head. And that was really.
What about when the pain subsides? Do you do
what
it
happens
again?
when we stop being drunk?
That's right.
Right. So we go straight. That's why you never see a cutter with 1 or 2 lines.
Yeah.
Right. There are scars up and down their legs, up and down their arms. They are doing something that they can't consume and get rid of. Right. They are doing something that is a permanent mark versus something that they consume, whether it be drugs or alcohol. Right. Yeah.
Huh. It's interesting. So you move across the country to California.
Yep.
Emo kid. I remember being in high school, seeing the emo kids, and I'm like, whoa, dude, like got the black hair, como, and we're the same age. I'm 40 or 41. It was you had like the emo kids, and then you had like the skaters, remember like Jenko jeans, and
that was me.
Yeah. I love the music. The music was great. But they were always kind of the outcasts, more the anarchy. Just,
I had a copy of the Anarchist Cookbook.
Did you?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Looking back on that time period in your life, was it just a rebellion type thing?
I had no clue how to exist in a world that I didn't feel I fit in. So I was constantly searching. Like, let's be clear. I didn't go, I want to be this. I went, I don't know how to handle. And then somebody else who also seemed to not know how to handle was there. And I saw them doing something that helped them handle. So it didn't, if I had run into and truly believed that basketball would have helped me handle, I probably would have chased basketball. But what I saw was immediate relief in someone else's face and eyes. And so that's when I started chasing that. Right. And I just happened to run into a emo skater as my first exposure to relief. And I was desperate for acceptance, desperate for relief, desperate for identification. So, I mean, at that point, it could have been anything, right? It just happened to end up being what it was.
It's interesting that you say that. It's not something that you developed on your own. It's something that was introduced to you.
Yeah.
Was that was in California?
Yeah. Yeah, that was in middle school, 8th grade.
So take us from there. You're going through this period of life. What did that look like for you? And then, when substances really started to paint a picture.
Yeah, man. Well, 8th grade, I got my first exposure to program because one of the guys I hung out with, we were giving him a ride home. My mom, he needed a ride home. My mom said yes, because obviously I didn't drive. And so we were heading to his place, and I said, hey, man, what are you doing tonight? Do you want to maybe, or tomorrow night or whatever it was, you want to go hang out on Friday? And he's like, oh, well, actually, I'm going to an Alateen meeting. And my mom all but stopped the car. She was like, what? Right? Because she's in AA at this point. Right. And so, I mean, shortly after that, I was exposed to Alateen and began being exposed to program. But like many of us, an exposure to program is not a license for abstinence or the ability to all of a sudden be healed. Right. So I went through high school, many, many, many different program events, whether it be Alateen. I spoke at Alateen conventions. I traveled for Alateen. I went to some Al-Anon meetings, and I wouldn't say I worked the steps, because I didn't, not in my opinion, but I had exposure to the steps. I had a sponsor. I, talked on a semi-regular basis with this man, and we reviewed who was a past Alateen who'd become an Al-Anon group sponsor and a sponsor himself, and talked about like the feelings and the overwhelmed and how to. And it really gave me an opportunity for balance, but life changes. I graduated high school. First I got a car and went to a few parties, stayed out too late sort of thing. And that's where I had my first blackout. And then kind of was like, all right, I got to chill. Like, that was crazy. I don't want to become my mom. I don't want to have this problem. I know I have the problem. My parents had explained to me that, like, hey, you're probably predisposed to this behavior. I don't know if they didn't see the cutting and the burning. I don't know if they didn't know about the food in that way. Obviously, it's kind of hard to hide the fact about overeating. So like they had always been like, oh, we're going to do this diet. We're going to do this thing. Not helpful. Right. Therapy. Probably just needed a lot more therapy. And then I went to college, and my freshman year in college, show up to the dorm room, unpack everything, meet the other 3 guys I'm in the dorm with. One of them is from Humboldt, California. And if you don't know Humboldt, California, it is the weed capital of California.
Humboldt?
Humboldt. Humboldt.
That's Northern Cal?
Yeah, it's Northern California. Now, at the end of the 70s, Humboldt was the up-and-coming weed producer of all of the United States. So before that, they were importing from, like, Jamaica and Mexico, primarily Jamaica, because Jamaica had taken over that import part to South Florida, and that's how most of the weed was getting in. But then with the 60s and the 70s, weed really took over from internal because it wasn't good enough. The stuff coming in wasn't of same quality. So they were growing in Humboldt. Anyway, so this kid was Humboldt through and through. And being exposed to that on a daily basis just gave me the excuse. It was a new environment. There were new people. There was a lot of my securities were gone. The systems that I had put in place to take care of tech were no longer present. I didn't have my friends. I didn't have my support group. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have Instagram and Facebook. So I was alone and isolated, and I was ready for it, and I was excited by it, but I inside didn't know how to handle the world still. I hadn't learned the tools to handle the world.
Even going through Alateen and all that stuff.
Yeah. Like I said, man, I never worked the steps all the way.
Right.
You don't have the steps, you're not prepared.
Give an example of what Alateen is, because to be fully transparent, we don't ever talk about Alateen.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I wouldn't go into too much detail because I have not been involved in Alateen in 30 years.
Yeah.
But, well, I guess not that, 28. But Alateen is a group designed for the teenagers. I think it's 12 to... There's Alapreteen as well. Yeah. So, but Alateen, our group was 13 to 18, really. I think there was a couple 19-year-olds. We would meet once a week. We would have 2, one female, one male leader, and they were Al-Anon usually members. After I left, it became, state mandated or organizationally mandated by Alateen, AA family groups, that those people be run through a specific validation, certification, whatever. What's background check? They had to have a background check. So, because it's teenagers in a vulnerable space. But basically, you go into a meeting, you sit down, you all read the readings, right? Alateen has its own literature. They have their own books. They have their own daily reader. I think they at least have their own book. They don't have their own daily reader, maybe, and you talk.
It's for like adolescents, teenagers that are struggling with substances or have parents.
Friends and family members of alcoholics who are adolescent. So, your dad, your mom, your sister, your brother.
Got it.
Uncles, anyone who's impacted.
Okay.
Just like Al-Anon.
Right.
You don't have to be married to them, right? But
yep. Wow. Okay, cool. So you're in Humboldt.
Yep.
I'm
in Sunnyvale, but my roommate was from Humboldt.
Right.
And so he was like, hey, we all got in. We had our first meal together at Denny's. We went back to the place, and he's like, you guys mind if I smoke in here? And we were like, no, because who wanted to be that guy? And within 2 weeks, I was smoking every single day. Within 2 weeks, I was the dealer at my college. It was fall right into line, right? Because I need to be accepted, because I need to fit in. And I found an opportunity to fit in. So I slid into that opportunity and made myself comfortable being a connection, being a resource for others, because maybe, just maybe, I would feel wanted.
So let's just recap. So from call it age 13 to 20, right? 20 is that when you got clean? 20? Okay. From 13 to call it 19, 20 years old, always this feeling of just not good enough, unacceptable, kind of left to your own devices, don't know where to go with life, latching on to anybody, anything that gives you some feeling of comfort, anything by way of food, self-harm, alcohol,
Yep.
marijuana.
Yep.
You get to this point where enough is enough. What's that?
The last night.
Yeah.
I had 2 technical last nights. The first last night was, I can't do this anymore. I can't be like this anymore. I'm done. Right? Packed up everything, all the utensils as they were. Packed up everything I had left to sell because I still needed to sell it in order to pay off. And I'm done. Woke up the next morning, and within an hour, I'm out of my mind. I'm just manic. I just remember feeling, what the hell do I do? What do I do? It was probably a moment of realization subconsciously of like, you're not going to be okay. You don't know how to handle. You still, after all these years, still don't know how to handle. So what are you going to do? So I started cleaning. I had a 2-story townhouse that I shared with one of my college roommates. You guys don't even want to know the rent. But it was great. It was an amazing place. We loved it. He was out of town visiting his family. And so I was alone, and I just started cleaning. And every inch of that place I touched and cleaned all day long, except for his room. Every inch. And when I was done, I was sitting on the couch, wringing my hands, still out of my mind. I didn't know what to do. I did.
Were you in like a manic episode, you think?
Maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't want to self-diagnose, but I will say that all the feelings that had been suppressed for year and year and year after year, it wasn't like they all came back at once, but it was if you took a sheet of paper, you took a ream of paper, and every day you tore the top inch off, right? And you put that in a stack, right? Because I can manage some of it, but I can't manage all the emotions. And after years and years and years of suppressing so much, I finally opened up the bag that I've been putting all those little top strips of paper in and dumped them all in my lap in one day. I'm used to handling a sheet of paper a day, and all of a sudden there was a stack of hundreds of days of little strips of paper, and I had to somehow manage that strips of paper because I didn't have the tools to keep that bag shut, to repress and contain the emotions and the whatever else it is, right? The spiritual pain that I was in. I kept that bag shut for a long time. But the problem is it never empties out. There's always contents in there. And until we learn how to turn it inside out, look inside the bag, look inside the darkness, you're just adding.
Yeah.
Right? We just add to it. But
oh man, I love the way you put that. Well, to lighten the mood a little bit, your roommate probably loved the fact that it was a clean place. And how much was the rent? You said you don't even know what the...
No, I know. I don't want. It's a 2-story townhouse in the Bay Area of California, $700 a month.
Shut up.
Nope.
How much is that now, you think?
Oh, it's well over $3,500 for that.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I could look it up, but yeah. And it was brand new because it had blown up 2 years prior.
Blown up?
Yeah. The townhouse building, there had been a gas leak and exploded.
Oh,
and so it was ground up, brand new building.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was you said there were 2 nights.
So that was the first night. Then the second day had the mania.
Cleaned
right.
Every square inch of the house. You're sitting there and you're still out of your mind.
And what do we do? What do we do when we have to fix it? We return to our old behaviors if we don't have a new set of tools. So I pulled out everything I had and I smoked it all. And I couldn't stop feeling. The paper was out on the floor. You can't put it back in the bag, right? And then I went to the freezer and I grabbed all the alcohol he had because I didn't have any because I wasn't really a drinker. And I drank all I'm talking like 2 or 3 bottles with like half or more, right? With vodka, there was rum, and there was something else. I mean, I don't really remember, but I remember the vodka and the rum because those were my favorites, and gone, downed them all. I couldn't stop feeling. I was still, I mean, I'm sure I was messed up, but like the thing I remember clearly is continuing to feel no matter the tool I applied to modify the way I felt. I even returned to self-harm, right? Finally,
That day?
yeah. Finally, I'm sitting on the couch and I'm just lighting this lighter in my hand. What the hell am I going to do? What the hell am I going to do? What the hell am I going to do? To the point where it's almost red hot. And if anybody remembers, they're old as me, something called a smiley.
Yeah.
You heat up the lighter, you burn your skin, it turns into a smile. The Bic lighters, please don't do that.
Yeah.
I couldn't get the smile to appear. No matter how many times I did it, it was always just the eyes. Now, whether that was psychological or what, I just sat there staring at it because I kept doing the same spot because I was trying to elicit a stronger and stronger reaction. But for about 7.5 years, I had those eyes staring at me. You know, and that night, I remember them pushing into my soul. It's just a wound on your arm. But in my mind, and especially at that moment, what it was a pervasive psychological deep look at who and what I had become and whether or not I would be able to continue to live with it. Right. And at the end of the roads, when we come to realize jails, institutions, or death, I realized I wasn't comfortable with the potential outcomes, and I only had one option. Right. One of the beautiful gifts in recovery is it's funny, he put those away like a couple minutes ago.
I know. These are my real recovery talk tissues. Shout out to Tammy for making the tissue box.
Is the ability to be emotional and to be comfortable with it.
Yeah.
So I picked up the 10,000-pound phone, as we talk about, and I called the person I know who had been sober the longest. I called my mom, and I the pleasantries, hello. And then I just broke down and I said, I need help. And she said, I've been waiting to hear from you. Cause like, they don't know all the details, but I think it's pretty hard to be completely blind if you're paying any attention to someone who's going through what I was going through.
Yeah.
So next day, she said, we stayed on the phone and she had me look up a meeting. The next day she came, picked me up, took me to my first meeting of recovery. And due to powers extremely beyond my control and for reasons I cannot explain, I have found it possible to not take a drink or mind-altering drug since then. So.
You were 20 years old. What was that date?
That was, the day I called her. Actually, it was after midnight, I think, when I called her. I don't even know. But my sobriety date is May 20th of 2023.
That's a hell of a story, dude.
Thanks.
I said in the beginning that I was going to learn stuff about you that I didn't know. And the vast majority of that I didn't know.
Yeah.
Wow. So some people listen to this and they're like, wow, 20 years old. Marijuana. It's just pot.
It is.
I hear this all the time from people. And I don't throw stones at people that can smoke pot. I don't. If you can smoke pot successfully, go ahead. I got friends that smoke pot and I'm like, fine. That doesn't bother me. But where I do draw an issue is when people pretend as if it's just, it's like, it's a plant. Oh, it's nature. Oh, it doesn't do anything. Like, it's not addicting. I hear that all the time. Marijuana's not addicting. I even draw an issue with the legalization of it. I don't understand, and maybe you can help me understand this. How is it any different? Marijuana in and of itself, it makes you feel a certain sort of way. You get high, right? The last time I checked, and I smoked my fair share of pot, you get high. How are you allowed to drive and operate a vehicle? And so as long as you have a medical marijuana card, you're not going to get a DUI. I've had friends that have literally gotten pulled over with pot smoke barreling out of the window of their car and nothing. I don't understand it. I can't wrap my head around it. Do you have an answer for that?
I mean, obviously, I can't talk to the significance of the legality or any of that, but I will say as much as I don't suffer from addiction to marijuana. I don't suffer from an addiction to self-harm. I don't suffer from an addiction to food. I suffer from the disease of addiction, which can take on any infinite number of forms. It just so happens that my addiction is to changing the way I felt. If water changed the way I felt, then I would use water, right? And I assume I could probably find an amount, a quantity of water that would modify the way I felt, but I found it in food. There's, FA, or is it Food Addicts Anonymous or something like that?
Overeaters.
OA.
Yeah.
There's so many different programs because there's so many different things that we can consume. And it's really hard for us sometimes to sit in a room and identify with other persons who consume something different to cause the same effect. We all suffer from a disease of not being able to, whether it's feel comfortable in our own skin, whether it's be a good person in a crowd. And most people turn to things that are socially acceptable, whether it be sex, video games, sports, working out, gambling. Gambling's starting to have some light shed on it.
Yeah.
But right, because the impact of gambling to extreme is more often than not, you're not the house. So you're losing money over the period of time. And that has a significant financial impact, or that has a financial impact, which is a significant social extremity. That's not okay. It's not okay to lose all your family's money. That's a big red flag.
Yeah.
Getting fat, there is a lot of social pressure on it, but it's almost also now becoming more socially acceptable to be overweight or plus size. And so that has its own role to play. Being high, being drunk, all of these things, everybody does something to maintain a state of okayness. The things that we do more often and to excess because we are unable to handle the world around us using a set of tools until we come somewhere where people say, I have followed your path. I have trod your path before you. I ended up using working out, drugs, alcohol, sex to excess. And I learned that for me, this set of tools allowed me to not do that anymore because I didn't want to. And that's why we say, until the person comes in ready to stop, they're not ready to be there. Right now, that is a highly controversial thing to say. Because there are so many people that are like, well, they don't have to go to the, No, they don't. There are many people who are able to stay clean and sober, who are able to stop gambling, who are able to stop overeating before they reach some tragic end. And I wish that for literally every person I have ever met in every room, because the ends are simple, right? We talk about them in the rooms, jails, institutions, and death. Almost everything will lead to one of those. Life leads to one of them. But for most of us, we don't have whatever it is that's necessary to truly seek a spiritual connection with a power higher than ourselves that will allow us to make the changes to depart from the set of tools that we've had our whole life. It's sad, but sometimes the best thing is to go back out.
Yeah.
Hard thing to say, harder thing to hear, but sometimes that's important for people to get to that end point. The difference today is because we're talking about it, because this exists, we can sit down and give people an opportunity to have a visualization into where they will go, what they could end up with, and they have a chance to recognize, as I did before I got too deep, I can make this change now. I had a template in my mother. I have a template in my friends in program and Alateen and AA, Alateen and Al-Anon, that I've seen many people come into the rooms and be okay, change. So I knew it was possible.
When you surround yourself with those types of people, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, when you really got plugged in and, you know, started surrounding yourself with people that you felt accepted, you felt plugged in, you felt like you had something to offer. How important was that for you? And the reason I ask this is because at least every podcast or every other, I'm talking about the importance of community and the people that we surround ourselves with. Because you growing up, you didn't have that. And the community that you did develop was obviously not the best. Caused all these things, self-harm, all the stuff that we went over. But now you're in a community surrounded by people that a lot of times we're all cut from the same cloth. It's a lot of other techs in the room. All signs lead to, well, this is going to be an absolute disaster. You put like 40, 50 techs in a room, shit, but it's the exact opposite. How important was that for you in terms of like, when did you feel going into these meetings and surrounding yourself with these people like, this is what I've been looking for 20 years of my life, or 21 or whatever?
Just before I answer that, if you amplify negativity, it grows exponentially. If you amplify positivity, if you go into a room of alcoholics and you drink, it gets rowdy. Right. You go into a room of recovery and you celebrate and you exist and live in recovery, same thing happens. So, I mean, I think that's the thing. 40 techs is okay so long as tech is focusing on recovery.
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
I have to remember that.
You were asking what was the significance of community, of getting plugged in, of staying in the center of the herd. I'm sure somebody on your podcast has talked about that.
Yeah, like can you pinpoint a time, like a moment when you're like, this is what I've been searching for?
Day 2.
Really?
Day 1, I went to the meeting and I mean, it was, I was rough, so I didn't have much to give or offer. But my presence and a reminder to those around me that this is what it can be like when you walk in the door. Day 2, there was a man, and I can say his name, and I'll explain why later. Charles Paquin. He was a good man, and he led the meeting, and I just like what he shared at the end of the meeting. And we chatted, and he said, "Hey, man, we're going out to lunch. Would you like to come with?" And I was like, "Oh, I really appreciate it. That's really nice. I just can't really afford it." He said, didn't ask you if you have money for lunch. I said, "Do you want to come hang out?" I was like, "Okay, fine." So me, him, and 2 other men went out. We were the only ones who were going out. One of them was Ricardo. He had over 35 years at the time. And another guy who was Charles's roommate. We all went out and had pizza, I don't know if they made the decision to go to pizza because that's like one person buys, everybody eats. But whatever it was, we went out and I watched these 3 men sit across from one another and talk on a level that I had not seen in years. Now, I say years. Many people come in here 30, 40, 50 years, whatever, after living the life. But for me, I had not seen genuine laughter. I had not had my eyes open enough to see genuine laughter, connection, brotherhood, honesty in what felt like forever. And when I saw these men celebrating life in a moment, they weren't cheering about it. They weren't focusing. They were just living in a way I hadn't lived or felt, I think, in my entire life. I was desperate for it. As much as I was desperate for someone to hug me and be like, "Hey," or, cheers, everybody knows your name, right? I wanted people to say, "Hey, how you doing, man? Welcome," right? It's really easy to do that when you're the guy with the thing someone wants. But for just to have someone say, I'm glad for your presence for no other reason than you are present, and I watched these men experience that and live that in that moment, I was desperate to have it. And it didn't take long to get it, because in the rooms, that's what we offer one another. Presence is your present. That's what you bring in to the rooms, is your presence and your ability to be there. Each person offers something different, whether it's the newcomer's reminder of how it is, how it can be, and how I will be if I continue to go, or the old timer saying, look, yes, life is crazy. It gets crazy. It gets crazier sometimes, but you're still here. You're still sober. You're still clean, whatever. Each one of those has a tremendous value. You don't get to know who that value is for. It's not for us to always know who we're helping, but it is our responsibility to be present. Otherwise, who could we potentially help? So, I mean, as much as I sometimes don't want to, that's why I still try and go to meetings as regularly as I should. Probably not, but possible.
Yeah. Before we started recording, you had mentioned, because we were like talking about some things potentially to talk about, and two things that you said that I think deserve going into. One being the homelessness. So let's start there.
Year 1, 2, I don't know. Somewhere around there, I was going to a meeting, and I think it was mid-year 1. Started going to the Queen of Apostles meeting, and it was a big meeting, and I was fresh. This was pre 6 months fresh, and that group was amazingly good at being like, "Oh, you're a newcomer, right?" Pull them in, sit them down, talk to them, hang out with them. As soon as a position came open, get them into service, right? So I got railroaded into coffee person. I have a little bit of the British in me, and that is like if something starts at 8, I'm there at 7:30, right?
Great, I love that.
My partner and I still, she just because it starts at 6 doesn't mean we have to be there at 6. And I'm like, you're right, we got to be there at 5:45, right? Like, we're talking about like a social engagement, like a
is that a party. British thing?
I mean, maybe it was certainly British for me.
Yeah,
for me and my family. And if you're not going to be there, you call you anyway.
My philosophy is if you're not early, you're late. So.
I hear that. I've also come to learn that my expectations for other people to think the same way I do about things like this are unrealistic.
I know, and it's frustrating. I know. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah. So, at that meeting, I met a group of people who I really liked. They were doing something I had never seen before, but I had heard of, and I was interested to learn more. But I didn't think too much about it. So I keep going to that meeting, and I'm talking years. If there was a position at the meeting, I had it twice. And I loved it. That was my go-to meeting. And I had a job around year 4 as a security guard. So I did private security, worked at a bunch of different places. One of the places I worked was Google. And at Google, I got an opportunity to learn how to ride a motorcycle. One of my coworkers had a bike. He brought in his spare bike. I bought a bike the next weekend. And the following weekend, I was on Skyline, which is the mountain road that goes along the ridge. It's, super good riding, but probably not the best place for me with 2 weeks of riding experience. I think it was actually 3 weeks. With that bike, I then got to go to that meeting on my motorcycle, and that motorcycle club was like, that's awesome. You want to go riding with us? And I was like, absolutely. So this was a clean and sober motorcycle club. And about 6 weeks later, we rode to Hollister Bike Week. That was great. It was a sense of brotherhood and acceptance that I had been searching for. And I later prospected into that club and became a patch member. And during that time, I made some decisions that led to me losing my job.
At Google?
Yeah, as a security guard for the security company.
Okay.
The contract at Google had ended. I was somewhere else.
Got it.
But essentially, I made unwise decisions that resulted in me falling asleep at my post, which you cannot do. As a security guard, it's really important. You literally have 2 jobs: observe and report. That's it. That's
and
the
stay
job.
awake.
well, you can't observe if you're asleep, and that's where I fell short,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I was promptly let go, and I don't know what to say. Like, my higher power was prepared to give me an opportunity to learn something. I had no clue at the time. What I saw was an unfair world treating me unfairly, of course. And so I lost my job. I started to get into the position where I might lose my place. And so for the couple months as I searched for other work, I went to the club and I would be like, oh my God, I'm looking for work. Anybody has anything. And I remember, miracle, right? I don't like that word for my own reasons, problems. One of the club members owned a business. He owned a print shop, and he's like, hey man, I got some stuff, some side work. I'm going to be in the office this weekend. Why don't you come in? And I would go in. I went in the first time. I did this twice. And he's like, hey, I need some help. Can you please? And he gave me a list of things to do. Sweep the floor, move this crates over here, grab the pallet jack. Do you know how to use a pallet jack? Yes. Okay. Go do this, go do that. Right. Very mundane physical labor. I think I was there for about 5 hours, maybe 6. And we didn't discuss anything to do with money. And when the job was over, he handed me a check for my rent for the month.
Wow.
It was it was very transparent to me. It had nothing to do with a patch on my back. This was who this man was, right? It's very difficult to remain humble enough to accept a check for rent for what was probably $100 worth of work, you know? And it didn't happen once. Like I said, he did it twice. But I still lost my place. I still couldn't get it together enough to find a new job, to get enough money to pay rent in 3 months, essentially 2 months, whatever. So I got a 7-day notice to pay rent or quit, and packed up all my stuff. I put everything I own into a storage container for the most part, parked my bike at a friend's place, and I had a 91 Buick Regal GS that I had bought from one of my high school friends' fathers. I don't know, a few years prior. Now, the great thing about that old car is it's got a big old trunk. So I had 2 large suitcases. One was for clean clothes, one was for dirty clothes. And for a year and a half, I lived out of that trunk. I would put my clothes into the dirty clothes, and then I would take clean clothes, and eventually I would wash the dirty one. That would become the clean laundry. I slept in many different places, but very rarely did I have to sleep in my car. Usually it was a friend's floor, a friend's couch. In the end, it got a little rough. I remember waking up in my sleeping bag on a floor in an apartment I'd never been to, owned by a person I didn't know. They were in program, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. But I remember waking up and looking down and seeing the cockroaches crawling across me. Now, mind you, I had over 5 years, no, over 6 at this time, of clean time and sobriety. And the only thing I could think to ask myself is, how did I get here? It's not supposed to be like this. And it was the first opportunity that my higher power gave me to learn that what I think things are supposed to be and how I think things are supposed to go have absolute shit to do with what they will be and how they will go. Because the world is not mine to control, and I am simply here to exist in it and experience it. So I get to control my behavior and my interactions with the world around me. And due to some choices that I had made and my inability to escape a cycle in my mind of fight or flight, I woke up in that floor, in that I was gonna say suitcase, sleeping bag on that floor. You know, I never went back to that apartment, needless to say. But at the same time, I am extremely grateful for her. I'm extremely grateful for that floor and for every one of those cockroaches and what they taught me. We all have to learn where our comfort level is for our life. And for some people, that is a nuisance and something that they're comfortable with, or they're willing to accept, because whether or not you like it, you're willing to accept it if you continue to live in there. Whether it takes a day, month, year, whatever, we can all grow past our current situations. Many of us choose not to. This program has taught me that. I try and remember and remind myself that I have opportunities that many people don't, and that it may be easier for me. And so I try and reach out and grant these opportunities to others when I have the chance. But I've been homeless. I've lived out of a car, and I have come back from that to the point where I got into a place and slept on a bed and paid rent. I got a apartment and paid rent. I moved in with other people and got a bigger place, a beautiful place, which they promptly ruined and infested with bed bugs. So I lost that place. Continuing to fight and change and grow through the program, through the people, through my own willingness to be vulnerable and transparent with those around me, to the point where I moved here to Florida and bought a home. A homeless man living in a Buick, working 40 hours a week, to a person who on a Friday morning can take off of work, ride his beautiful, expensive motorcycle across town from his home to go do a podcast to talk about his journey. That is insane. It's insane. And I don't think it is, because it's just my life, until people remind me, like, no, man, you have come from something so far away from who you are today. How did you do it? And I just said, I don't know. Every day I have an opportunity to do something different than I did the day before. And some days I make the wrong choices. But more often than not, I do the next right thing. And for some strange reason, when you do that, things get better. Right? So don't ever think that you're not worth the next right thing. Don't ever think you're not worth the house and the motorcycle. I want to be really clear. Those are the things that represent the success that I can show outwardly, and that the true success is how I feel, and the ability to cry in front of you, and the ability to tell Tom my story and to share my pain with him when we talk at that meeting on Wednesdays. But most of us, when we get here, what we want is the house. What we want is the motorcycle, or to get the relationship back, or to get the kids back. And none of that would have happened for Tech 20 years ago. There was no part of that man who was prepared for the life I live today. Being homeless, losing jobs. I had to experience and live every one of those moments to be who I am and where I am today. So I was a lot more than just talking about the homelessness, but yeah.
What I sense from you, and I have sensed from you throughout this whole episode, has been gratitude. I mean, and I think that gratitude is oftentimes used, it's used a lot inside and outside the rooms, but sometimes we just use that word without even really, I don't know, like, yeah, I'm grateful. Yeah, I'm grateful. But everything that you shared today is what I believe to be a true representation of gratitude. Looking back at all the experiences, everything that you've gone through, and not even knowing how you got here, I think is an important piece. And let me explain why. Not knowing how you got here, and I'm just thinking this on the top of my head, so if it doesn't make sense, it makes sense to me. Not knowing how you got here is important, because they're not things that, it almost can help tamper down the ego in a way. Like, I'll tell you how I got here. I was homeless. I was this. I was that. I was living out of a Buick. I was, trudging through the hard times. It's easy I could see that being very ego in a way, but it's just, there are things that you went through. It helps amplify the gratitude. I don't know how I got here. I have no idea how I got here. Yeah, I had tough times. Everything that I went through, yeah. I don't know. I lived it. I was homeless. I lived in a Buick for a year and a half. I woke up in a sleeping bag with cockroaches crawling all over me. Doesn't make me any different than you or I. But I'm grateful that I went through all that stuff.
Everybody has their cockroach moment.
Yeah.
The thing that I often tell people is, my worst day is no worse nor better than yours, because our emotional, psychological, spiritual moments are just as powerful as anyone else's. So the extremes on the scale, whether it be good and bad, whether it be positive and negative, however you want to say it, are equivalent. You know, if the best thing that I've ever done is eaten a freshly cooked pepperoni pizza, right? And I just remember feeling overwhelmed with joy and happiness and sharing it with these other men and learning about how to be around these guys and be myself and be, if that is the best moment I've ever felt, 2 days clean, it is just the same as the person who won the lottery, right? If that's their best, if that's what they quote as their best day. So when I see someone celebrating for a reason that I think is better than mine, or when I see someone celebrating for a reason that I feel like hasn't quite maybe achieved the level, I am extremely glad, because I know exactly what they're feeling, because I remember my best moments. The reason I watch a movie and I weep is because when I see someone else lose and feel pain that strikes that part of their heart, I remember that moment, that deepest pain that I felt on that one moment where I thought the world was going to shatter or I was going to end, right? Whatever it was. So, I don't think it matters, like you said, that I laid on that floor and had cockroaches, but everybody has a cockroach moment. Everybody has a moment when they realize that they fought so hard to change everything about themselves. How the hell are they still here? It's because it's just a journey, and you're being given an opportunity to change everything one more time. Don't worry, there'll be another, but you don't have to worry about that day. It'll get here when it gets here.
Yeah, life's going to happen one way or another. Well, yes. That was great. Let's lighten it up a little bit. Let's land the plane. So you've been now here in Florida 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Married.
Yep.
How long you been married?
Been married since 2016. So
met your wife in California.
Yep.
Another fruit of sobriety, if you will. You're working, you're gainfully employed. What do you do for work?
I'm a software engineer. I'm a nerd.
That's a fancy. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't go to school for it. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother podcast.
Oh, dude. Really? You didn't go to school for it?
No.
You
never finished college. Yeah.
And wow. Okay. So that's proof in and of itself that you don't necessarily have to have a degree in engineering to be an engineer.
Yep. Absolutely not.
Interesting. No, we're going to save this for, definitely you're coming back on the podcast for sure. We're going to save that for another time. Okay. So just some random questions.
Sure. Let's run it.
Food in comparison, California to Florida, what's better?
100% California.
I've only been to California twice. One time I spent a whole month there.
Oh.
And, I would have to agree.
I will amend it with I have not been in Florida and traveled enough to be thorough. But if you're talking blanket statement from my experience so far, the diversity, intensity, and execution of food in California vastly superior to what I've experienced so far here in Florida.
So you grew up in Northern California.
Yeah, that's where I did my most of my growing.
When people say the Bay Area, what does that mean? San Francisco?
Yeah, San Francisco Bay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Ben and I, we were just out there in July. We went to San Jose to record with this Mind Pump podcast, and they're based out of
Nice.
San Jose. And we took the what's this train?
Bart.
Yeah, well, there's two of them. There's the BART and
There's BART, which is Bay Area Rapid Transit. That's like think of like this, not the subway. What do they call it out here? Like the Bright Line, sort of a vibe, but it's not privately owned. I don't think it's trash.
Yeah.
And then there's Muni up in SF that does their local, and then there's what's it called?
I think it was the BART that we were on.
I took it every day to go to work. Anyways, there's one that runs from San Jose to San Francisco, directly along the peninsula side.
This wasn't directly. There were like 12 stops on the way.
Stops, but did you go up the coast or did you go around through the East Bay?
I don't know. I have no idea. It was 2 level.
Okay, that's the other one. Yeah, that's not BART. BART is single level.
Okay, no, this was 2 level.
Yeah,
what was this called?
That's what I rode to work every day.
But it was
not Amtrak. It's the other one. It's a major train.
Caltran. Yeah, Caltran.
Well, Caltran is the one that runs the tracks, but the trains are actually owned and operated by somebody else.
Yeah, it was quite the experience, to say the least. Really dirty. It was kind of like,
that's the clean one.
Really?
BART is where you get the shootings, the stabbings, and the junkies.
Oh, good Lord. Oh my gosh. Well, it was so we ended up taking the Caltran into San Francisco, and we went to like Fisherman's Wharf and
Nice.
walked. We walked all, I think I had my Apple Watch on. I think we put like 30,000 steps in that
Which is
day.
different than Florida. 30,000 steps in Florida is you're dealing with humidity and temperature. 30,000 steps in San Francisco is, hundreds and hundreds of feet of elevation change continually.
Yes.
It's not flat.
Just up and down and up and down. And I'm like, oh my. We went into Chinatown. That was cool.
Oh, Chinatown's rocks. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
dirty, but
yeah, but it's like, you kind of expect it in a way,
I love traveling. I recommend everybody visit San Francisco. It's a wonderful place. It's got some extremely cool history. There's great places to go. But any city that has an app to tell you where the human excrement is on the sidewalk, I don't need to live there.
Right. Yeah. And that was the thing. I mean, so that was the second time I was there, was just in July. And back in 2018, I was there for a whole month. Again, flew out there for a podcast. And at the time, my wife's sister's husband was stationed in Sacramento.
Oh.
So spent a lot of time in Sacramento. And then I think we took like 3 days and drove to San Francisco. And I remember this because my wife had mastitis, which is, we had a newborn at the time. And mastitis is when like milk ducts clog. And it can cause like severe flu-like symptoms, like your breasts become like engorged and very painful. Well, this happens in San Francisco. But there was a day where things were kind of okay. And so it was me, her, and at the time I had 2 kids. One was like literally 3 months old, I think. And we're just walking at Fisherman's Wharf. And I see this like homeless guy that was wearing a long dress, obviously mentally ill, and he was peeing in the garbage can. And then you walk, you walk down a little bit more, and then there's this other homeless guy just screaming at the wind, whatever. And I'm like, oh my God. But the overall experience was cool. The interesting thing was that time I was there for 3 days. I didn't see one police officer. Not a one.
So they are horribly underfunded and overpressed. The short story, had to get my car registered, had to do whatever paperwork you got to do when you move out here. Didn't know what to do. Read the form. It said, you need this. Call this number. The number took me to the local sheriff's office in the city I'm out here. And they were like, well, what, how can we help you? It's non-emergency. I told them what I was trying to do. And they said, no worry, we'll have someone right over. And I was like, what? And literally in less than 10 minutes, a sheriff showed up at my house, signed the document, had a little chat, and went back to work. If there wasn't a felony occurring, a police would take at least an hour to show up at your house. They just didn't have the numbers, right? It's tragic.
Yeah. And I'm not old. Well, I've never lived there, but like, is it the same San Francisco as you remember?
No, I didn't go there a lot as a kid, but I did go there a couple of times. And regardless of my experience, I know so many people who lived there, who experienced their disease there, who got clean and sober there, and then, and they just constantly talk about it. It's changed as the world changes, but it has accentuated in a certain way that's rather negative, unfortunately. And as far as the homeless people go, I think one of the biggest denoters for me is the homeless persons I've run into, who I say many of them have chosen to remain in that, generally speaking, are in need of serious psychological help.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen such a high degree of that other places in the country. I have seen it in a couple, but there it's abundantly transparent with the violence they do to one another, the violence they do to property, the violence they do to themselves. It's just different. It's a different homeless population, I think. Now, I'm not a social worker and I have not studied it, so I only speak from my little bit of personal experience that I fear the homeless people out there a lot more than I would other places.
Yeah.
Because they're just unpredictable.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there was there was a lot of good things that we experienced. I loved going to Alcatraz. That was
Alcatraz
cool.
fun. And you said the wharf, the place is amazing. You just have to be mindful. Right?
You have to find them. You have to seek them out, and you have to be able to look past all the other stuff.
And the cool thing is when they come into the rooms and you see them and you watch them change, and then because of their familiarity, like we talked about earlier, they get to go back into those places and try and bring some of their friends out of that life.
Yeah.
Through whatever form.
Yeah, we have that on a small scale here. I mean, there's obviously homeless people. You go down to downtown West Palm Beach, there's a lot of homeless people, but I understand what you're saying. It's different. Well, I don't know. I don't know that. I haven't experienced San Francisco homeless population, but I have experienced it here. And, you just kind of walk amongst them and, they say hi, they're nice. They're just down on their luck, I guess. A lot of mental health though.
There was a guy in San Jose that used to chill at the Krispy Kreme. There was a Krispy Kreme next door to an amazing Asian restaurant that my wife and I used to go to. And he would be out there like a lot. He also hung out at like a Chevron, and my wife would see him quite often. And his gig was whenever somebody walked to the door, he would open the door. He would not say anything. And then, if they said thank you, he would say thank you back. And then when you were leaving, he would open the door and he would say, have a nice day. That was what he did. He never asked for anything. Now, people would still get him things, but it was incredible. Right?
Yeah.
And when we finally did sit down and talk to him, he said, I've chosen this. I prefer this version of my life, and I choose to live like this. I have what I need and what I want. So there are definitely many people who are content and happy, and that's their life and that's their business, and kind. But yeah. So many, just like in recovery, there's so many different ways to live your life. I guess it exists outside as well.
There was a Mexican restaurant in San Jose, and I'm going to text my buddy and ask him the name of it that I went to. Oh, it was phenomenal. It was so good. But anyways, I'll figure it out. Well, we're an hour and 10 into this. That was fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing all that, dude.
Absolutely.
We're definitely going to have you back on. I want to have you back on with Ben because he's you and him would jive well. So we'll set that up. Any final thoughts?
I mean, so many, but the biggest one is, if there's any part of my story that you relate to and you feel like is helpful, understand that it's just my story and that every part of it is, I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought there.
Anybody can get sober.
Yeah.
Everybody has a story. Don't let it hold you back.
No matter if you're living in a Buick or if you've already got a house, your bottom is your bottom.
Yeah.
Make of it what you will.
That's right. All right. That is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, info@realrecoverytalk.com. Again, that's info@realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.
Later.